Tony Fauci was at Jake Tapper's house having lobster. They weren't wearing masks. While you were locked down, while your business was forced to close, Tony and Jake were sipping anisette, making fun of Laura Ingraham. My team has gone through all of this, the entire Tony Fauci man diary, and it is worse than we ever imagined. And this guy's going to testify tomorrow. Here's an entry from July 2020, quote, "After my Laura Ingraham hit, Jake Tapper texted me saying sarcastically, 'Hard to believe Laura Ingraham went to Dartmouth, isn't it? All of us alumni are very proud,' end quote." Apparently, Jake went to Dartmouth, Ivy League school, and he can't believe that somebody dirty like Laura Ingraham went to the same school and graduated from the same school. And you can just picture Jake at the Dartmouth Club in Washington, Big D, making fun of Laura with all of his closest lifelong friends. Here's another entry from Tony dated July 13th, 2020, quote, "Yesterday, Florida had 15,000 infections, the most for any state since the beginning," because Tony, of course, always starts with the death. He always talks about the death toll in almost every journal entry. Then he gets to the most important news of the day, which is where Tony is at his very Tony best, Fauci on Fauci, that portion of the diary entry. Quote, major show of support for me from multiple sectors." I don't know what that means. "Most people expressing outrage that the Trump administration would be so bumbling and incompetent to try and discredit the most credible scientist in the world," end quote. Tony Fauci actually wrote that about himself. Think about that. How dare you question the science because no one questions the great all-knowing Tony Fauci? And if you did, they kicked you off social media. They kicked you off Facebook because science was invented for Tony. Tony Fauci is science, and science is Tony Fauci. And he was worshipped by people like Julia Roberts because of it.
Hello. Hi there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, this is such a thrill. How are you?
Pretty good, I guess. You know, it's a little bit like running on fumes for a couple of months, but
I would imagine this is a thrill for me because there are very few experts of anything in the world, I think, and you truly have emerged as a personal hero for me. Just to have this little corner of your time for us is such a joy.
How embarrassing is that? Seriously, like for both of them, especially Julia Roberts. Here's another entry from November 23rd, 2022, after a hearing on Capitol Hill. One of his first, quote, "I must say, I did extraordinarily well, and the DOJ lawyers said that was one of the best performances they have ever seen," end quote. That was Tony's take on what happened. Now, here's what really happened, but don't take my word for it. Here's his old dinner buddy, Mr. Dartmouth himself.
I don't know how many times I can say it, Madam Chair. We did not fund gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
We now know that a bat coronavirus was enhanced in a lab.
The NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
The National Institutes of Health acknowledged that it funded research of a virus that was studied at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Oh, Jake and Tony. More red wine, please, honey, while you're in the kitchen for Jake and Tony. Here's another journal entry that shows just how desperate little Tony was to be liked, which is sort of pathetic at age 80. This is July 2020. Quote, "I reached out to Congressman Joe Kennedy since we had a garbled exchange at a House hearing last week, and it looked like he was annoyed with me." Oh, my. We can't have that now, can we, Tony? Tony went on, quote, "I wanted to set the record straight and develop a relationship with him. I was good friends with his uncle Teddy. We had a 30-minute Zoom conversation, and it was terrific. I believe this is the beginning of a real friendship," end quote. Tony couldn't live with the thought of a Democrat being mad at him. So in the middle of a global pandemic that he was tasked with managing, he set up a 30-minute Zoom call with a nothing congressman from Massachusetts to smooth things over. That guy's not even in Congress right now, but he never did that with a Republican. He never wrote about it in his journal, I can tell you that. He never did it with Rand Paul or Ron Johnson or Jim Jordan. Think about that. And think about this. Tony also claimed that he never recommended shutting down schools.
They always come back and say Fauci was responsible for closing schools. I had nothing
Yeah.
to do.
I mean,
let's get down to the facts. You really want to think twice before you start putting kids back to school.
We have a lot of infection going on. I think you've really got to use judgment and carefully consider, do you really want to put the kids back in school?
I believe was the right decision. How long you kept them closed.
Well, isn't that interesting? We could go on. Tony claims he had nothing to do with shutting down public schools for 3 years. But here's his diary entry that we found from March 20th. Quote, I spoke with Bill de Blasio and convinced him, based on what I was saying publicly and my conversation tonight, to close New York City schools. I had a similar call with Ann O'Leary, the chief of staff for Governor Gavin Newsom, and Ann said, based on my TV appearances, the governor has decided to close the schools in California as well as the bars and the restaurants, end quote. And there you have it. Tony, in his own words, Tony recommended that schools should be shut down, and millions of children were forced into remote learning on iPads that many students didn't have or couldn't afford or weren't provided. And more than 100,000 restaurants closed their doors forever and never reopened. While Tony was messaging with people like Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd and Chris Wallace and Barbara Streisand, by the way. In another diary entry, Tony is writing about an Instagram post with supermodel Tyra Banks. And Tony Fauci wrote, quote, one person said that Tyra was very sexy, but that I was even more sexy than she was. Again, this is an 80-year-old man writing in his journal that somebody commented on an Instagram post that he was sexier than a supermodel 50 years younger than him. What a weirdo. What a sicko. What a tool. My opinion.